welcome to Beyond the Venue podcast. I'm your host, MG, the venue specialist. We have a super exciting treat today. This is our final episode of season 1. So we're flipping the camera around and bringing in my producer, Daniela Galdi. Good morning, Daniela.
Good morning.
So she is the founder of byVesta agency who produces Beyond the Venue podcast. And I am super excited to bring her on today. And we're just going to recap season 1 as well as, dive into topics like I do with the rest of my guests. So she is a woman of many, 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 many talents. And I am so glad that your cousin introduced us a couple of years ago. It's just been a whirlwind romance ever since. But we, earlier in the season, I had Jason and Michelle on as guests, and we talked about how I had spent time in their office. And I had brought up one of their employees who is cousins with Daniela, who says, you have to meet my cousin. And so this was the summer of 2019. And I think we did maybe like a phone call, maybe, because this was pre-Zoom.
I think so. I think we did a phone call and then we were like, let's meet up.
And you're like, I'm going to introduce you to these 20 people. And as people keep popping up in my life, and I'm just going to keep introducing. And I'm like, this girl is just unstoppable. I love this. And we finally got to meet up in person at Front Street Cafe. So we are going to finally get to meet up in person again next week and hug each other for the first time in a very, very long time. I cannot wait for that. But you said you also had another Front Street Cafe story. I'd love to hear about it.
Oh, okay. So, first of all, I missed you so much, MG, and I cannot wait to see you and hug you and eat cauliflower from Front Street Cafe. So a funny story with Front Street Cafe, which I can't remember if I told you, but I will tell all the listeners. So, when I was 24, I had a Pilates studio for 4 years in Northern Liberties, and I had moved to 3 different locations. It was an ordeal. Talk about commitment issues. I couldn't commit to one location, and there were reasons behind it. But my final location was actually my landlord was the owner of Front Street Cafe. And I remember I was closing up my shop at that time, and I had to bring a check, because in that world we were dropping off checks and things like that. So I had to bring a check to Leo was his name. And I actually got to see Front Street Cafe when it was all rubble and they were just in the first stages of creating it. And I remember him telling me, he was so excited. And I remember him telling me, like, it's going to be this great cafe, and there's going to be an upstairs, outside, and we're going to break all these walls down, and there's going to be healthy options. There's going to be food. And it's incredible. So if you haven't, I know you've been, but anyone else listening, it's incredible. And it was so interesting to see it from like rubble. And then I think like whenever they were finished, my boyfriend actually he said, hey, remember that place that Leo opened? It's all done now. And I said, oh my gosh, I have to check it out. So when I could get over there, I was like, this is incredible what they turned it into. So beautiful. And oh gosh, it's just so yummy, everything.
It's funny because I lived in Northern Liberties while I was in grad school. So I wonder if our paths ever crossed and we just didn't know it, because when Front Street Cafe was opening, a girlfriend of mine from Drexel was helping them kind of like get open. And so she was doing kind of like front of house operations, and part of her responsibility was to help put together the beer list. And I was working at Flying Fish at the time. And so she'd reached out to me and said, hey, can you bring some samples? Like we would love to carry Flying Fish. Like we just need to figure out which one it's going to be. And so meeting with the owners, and it's all about relationships. It's all about who you know.
I bet we've crossed paths so many times before we actually met.
Never knew it. Life always finds a way. So, and then, getting able to reconnect with the space once again because they do, I'm curious to see what they're going to go back to. But before the pandemic, they were doing a max 55-person wedding on the second floor up there. And just such a beautiful space where you can take the ceremony in that private room and flip the space around. And, it sucks that I feel like I'm curious to see what's going to happen in the event space, because it seems like people are done with the small and they're ready to go big. But I think there's still going to be a lot of need for, a niche space like that. And there'll always be an amazing restaurant and cafe. So
absolutely. And I agree with you, MG, about, I do think the idea of like small party situations is going to stay. I can speak for myself when I say, especially when we talk about it later with all those wedding festivities, but there's some things I value so much about like an intimate space. And I just feel like Front Street Cafe literally has so many options, especially with like their outdoor space. And there's so many options. But so I feel like I geek out a little bit at like seeing how venues are utilizing their spaces. So I can't imagine what it's like for you as the venue specialist.
It's I joke that every time I walk into a new venue, that really takes my breath away, that, husband, we're getting divorced and getting remarried here because this is it. This is the space. And then it's like, oh, well, I could just have a party here.
You don't have to
go through all that legal. But it's just such an abundance of super cool, unique venues, whether it's a restaurant or, an unfurnished space. It's, Philly it's overflowing and I love it. So I also geek out and get excited. But at the same time, it's my job to figure out what the client wants, because it's their event, not mine. So I digress. So we kept in touch throughout the pandemic, still continuing to support each other in various ways where we could. You've always been such an amazing cheerleader on Instagram, which is so adorable. And then in December, you had reached out to me and said, hey, I have an idea that I've been noodling on. Would you be interested in hosting a podcast? And I'm like, sure. Events are shut down. A whole lot going on right now. So when we spoke more in detail about it and had that, deep dive conversation, you shared with me, and I didn't realize until later on that you had this idea in the back of your mind for years of the concept of saving a seat, save her seat, save my seat. And that was your original idea for a podcast. And initially I loved the idea, but as I started researching, I was like, okay, there's like a couple, like, I'm not 100% sold on it. Let's keep throwing some ideas around. And, the concept of Beyond the Venue was born. But, with all of the episodes that we've recorded, I was hesitant to come up with the episode name first. I wanted to see where conversations went, see where the themes are. And, I never thought I was much one for puns, but I feel like I've done a pretty good job.
You have, you absolutely have.
But it felt so appropriate to call this episode, She Saved Me a Seat, because you literally saved a seat for me. I saved a seat for you. Apparently the universe has been trying to get us to work together for probably the last 2 decades, and it finally happened. And so, can you share with our listeners a little bit more of your backstory, as to how, like, why me?
Oh, that's easy.
And, yeah, like, why, let us know a little bit more backstory.
Absolutely. So I have nothing but pure love for you. I don't know if you knew this.
I do.
So, I appreciate your kind words and everything, but everything in terms of like following along with like what you do in your business and who you are. And like when we met at Front Street Cafe, like we clicked so instantly, and I just loved your energy, and I also loved how like, well, I loved how funny you were and are. But I also loved how like you listened so well, and you had this great energy. You listened so well, and you're also very enthusiastic for me as well. But then it also just you have this really graceful assertiveness about you, which I admire so much. So yes, I am going to gush over you, all the listeners.
Graceful assertiveness. I love
Yes,
that.
you do. Put that in your bio.
I gotta, okay, we're gonna cancel the podcast so I can go update my Instagram bio. Put in the grace and graceful assertiveness.
You do. And so I was just so many things, so it was pure love, pure support. But I actually had you in mind for so long. So my background is artistry. So I grew up as a performing artist in dance, and then it's expanded from there. I started to go more into production of videos, and I've done live productions for like over a decade, maybe even longer than that, but I won't do the math right now. And so, I for the past few years, I transitioned from, while I still love live performance and will do it, I started to find a new love of like media and communications and expanding on like the digital world and how can that work. So I've been in front of the camera. I did like QVC for a few years, and I did a lot of interviews. I have my own podcast, which you mentioned, Still Standing Podcast. But my love for like making ideas come to life has never ended, MG. So, I can think back to my senior year of college, and it was like that time where you're like, okay, what do I do? Am I just going to go audition for a million things, which I did. That never, I know, right? Exactly.
That senior year of the what's next, what are you doing? I remember telling my best friend's mom, because people wouldn't stop asking me. I was like, I'm going to open a surf shop in San Diego. Like that's, I don't surf. I don't, but it's just, we had just gotten back from a trip, and I'm like, I don't know what I am doing with my life.
Listen, I'm still figuring it out, but
I tell you what, all your listeners out there that are trying to figure out the what's next, like, it's okay. You take your time and figure it out, and it's not what you have to do for the rest of your life. And I think both of us are proof of that.
Exactly. That is exactly right. And, and be confident, because I remember I had so much self-doubt, and I think but my path took me where my path was supposed to go. But, I think had I had more confidence, I would have done other things. But I really just, I narrowed it down my senior year to like, I just want to like make all these ideas in my head come to life and help other people with their ideas come to life. I mean, in a nutshell, that's what it is. So, how many ways can we do this? So I actually had you in mind for a very long time. I keep an inventory list of all the ideas, and God forbid my phone does anything. Like, knock on wood, I will probably go into the deepest depression I've ever been in and just be like, I can't go on anymore. Because
you gotta back up your hard drive. That's what Sex and the City taught us that. You gotta back up that hard drive.
Oh, I know the exact episode you're talking about too, with Aiden, right?
You didn't back up your hard drive? No, I did not.
Oh, that's so great. I love it. So I keep it backed up, thankfully. But I have had this idea in my phone for I think like 2 or 3 years now at this point. And I knew it wasn't for me. So I knew it wasn't. I was like, I mean, you and I even were speaking before this, like I knew I needed someone who knew the industry, who was so in love with like events and venues and, all these things. And so it wasn't me. Although I love to hear about it, I love to go to them. I really, I enjoy coordinating things. It wasn't for me. So I'm pretty sure I don't know if I told you this, but I'm pretty sure I had you in mind probably when I left Front Street Cafe, like whenever, but so I had this idea and I was like hesitant to ask you. And then finally I was just like, what do I want? I wanted like to bring event talk and, and it goes back probably to my love of like artistry and artists and helping them to promote themselves. So it was like, but how can I make this even bigger and like broader to be like, all right, let's highlight people in events. Let's highlight people who are putting on events. Let's highlight people just in the industry working around, bars, restaurants, things like that. So it started to expand. And as it did, it was just like it was almost like lights were going off every time, like MJ, MJ, MJ. Like she's
Well,
so
the timing was
perfect.
perfect. Like if you would have asked me prior to December 2020, I probably still would have just said yes, because I would have been in love with the idea. And I obviously love you too. And I absolutely love your energy. But it wouldn't have been the same. And I wouldn't, it was the exact right time when you asked. And one of the reasons, well, there's a multitude of reasons. One being, they shut down events again in mid-November, like specifically indoor events, and no one's doing outdoor events in the winter. And so events were shut down. And I also, at the same time, the universe was reaching out to me because I had done a workshop with my friend Hillary Ray, who owns Tell Me a Story. And, part of what she does is help you bring out the stories to help, whether it's selling yourself, telling your brand, telling your story. And so I had done a workshop with her in September, and it was just kind of like a 1 week, one time thing. She reaches out in November, right when things are shutting down, and says, I'm offering a special to clients who took part in, part 1. Would you like to do a more intense deep dive and do part 2? And at first I was hesitant, mostly from a financial standpoint, but then I looked at everything that I was supposed to get out of it, and still at the time had no idea that I'd be doing a podcast. And part of the workshop, and I guess a major part of it, is you are recording for 2-hour sessions with her. So exactly like what I do with my podcast guests. And I'm having to go back and watch myself perform. And that's a question that I've gotten from several friends about the podcast is, how awful is it to hear your own voice? And I'm like, it's totally fine now. Where it working with Hillary, I was able to work out the insecurities and kind of get my confidence back, get my voice back, and be, even when I would go back and watch the recordings and it's like, I was not feeling very good that day, or, I had a terrible night's sleep the night before, but I'm still coming across totally fine. How is this possible?
It's so that was incredible, right?
It was this very transformative experience that just gave me the confidence I needed to host a podcast. And so then when you reach out to me and say, do you want to host a podcast? I'm like that is part of what, Hillary's one-on-one workshops are designed to do, that like, if you're going to be either a guest on a podcast, a host on a podcast. And so I'm ready. Bring it on.
And I loved that you had that when you mentioned along our journey together, when you mentioned having had that training, I was so happy, because it is for myself, having the training with it's a long journey. Sometimes it's a bit to get over those insecurities at first, or to be able to hear your voice. And I'm coming from somebody who, my whole life I've been dancing, and I've had to see myself on video forever. And I was like, oh, wow. It was as if I had never performed when I first went on to my first media coaching training. And also I was like, oh, okay, I have to accept that's my voice.
It's like listening to a voicemail or something of yourself, or hearing your voice prior to that. It's definitely cringeworthy. And do I really sound like that? Yeah, you do. And everybody thinks that.
And everyone thinks it. And then you get over it, and then you notice, what works, what's actually a distraction, and what's actually just a distraction to you. If we are going to digress, I have a really funny story about a voicemail though.
Digress away.
So when I was very tired, I remember being very burnt out in my studio. So I was in my 20s, and I was probably tired, and I apparently made a voicemail that was on there for clients to hear for, I can't even tell you how long. I want to say at least a good few months, if not a year. And finally, nobody brought it up to me. Nobody in my life brought it up to me. And finally, I think it was my boyfriend who said, did you ever hear your voicemail? It's hilarious. And I was like, or my voice message, it's hilarious. And I said, no, why? What is it? It's just me saying hey, this is Daniela. I must have not saved the right one. And so forever my voice message was, "Hi, you've reached Daniela." And it was just me moaning, like so frustrated that I was like, nobody told me. I've had like people, like clients and like professionals call me. So I digress.
Well, I think we laugh too that I know for years the joke has been made, who actually uses their phone as a phone anymore? Like we are constant texters and emails that it's even I would so much rather, book stuff online and I love talking to people, but when it comes to like simple interactions, I would rather just like push a couple buttons. And so, making a phone call and then do you leave a voicemail or do you just send a text message? And typically like 99% of the time, I'll just send a text message because is it the first time I'm calling this person? And they're not picking up because they're screening it because they don't recognize the number. And so I will text. So I'm hoping that a lot of people just found it hilarious that, but it's funny too, because that doesn't match your personality at all. And so I think maybe because it was such, what you weren't expecting that I would like to think that I would crack up and probably cry. I'd laugh so hard as I did at this story just now.
Oh, good. Yeah, it was hilarious.
And I just had a girlfriend of mine that puts together like an entrepreneur meetup. Her and I were playing phone tag and just a couple months ago. And she said, your outgoing message, it had it's Mary Grace from my former employer from 4 years ago.
Oh.
And so I don't know if this was some sort of phone update that it reverted back, but it was so strange because I'm like, yeah, that was 4 years ago. Like
that's spooky.
I definitely know that I changed it after that. So I'm glad that she let me know. And I'm also glad that I don't really get all that many phone calls.
Yes. Now it wouldn't matter for me because now it's all, again, it's like you said, it's all text and emails and things like that. But back then, I wonder how many people were like, oh, she's going through it.
Well, speaking of going through it, one of the recurring themes throughout the entire season, and we've had a bunch, I mean, community, relationships, the hospitality community really looking out for one another, taking care of each other, finding these creative ways to just exist. But one of the things that we kind of kept coming back to that, especially since May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Let's talk about mental health. I've been seeing a therapist for several years. And I always talk about it because I want to normalize therapy. I definitely agree that it's, mental health is health and it should be a part of healthcare, which is already a complete disaster in our country to begin with. So I'd love for you to talk about your organization Still Standing, and let our listeners know what that's all about.
Absolutely. And I just have to say, I, MG, think you did such a phenomenal job at fostering and supporting people throughout each episode and being able to open up conversations. Again, you were graceful because it's part of
graceful assertiveness.
Graceful assertiveness. But yeah, when you mentioned that, when we were going through this whole process of creating Beyond the Venue, when you mentioned the important parts to you, like bringing up mental health and opening up conversations, I loved that because that took it so much further than what I had even envisioned for the original, the original thought. And so you wanted to bring in so many amazing things about like mental health, inclusivity, and all these like social justice and just how people can get ahead and progress with love. And so I think you just did such an amazing job at that with who you brought on and the guests. Am I able to plug? Go back and listen to the episodes if you haven't, everyone.
Yes, of course.
But like all the great guests you brought on and the variety of topics, but then it all did, like you said, it all came back to like community and mental health and being there for one another and the relationships and things like that. So I
And
commend
the
you on that.
vulnerability of our guests
Yeah.
has been amazing, and the willingness for them to share a piece of themselves with the universe, I thought was just absolutely
Yeah.
beautiful. And I will say, listeners, so part of my process to make sure that I am speaking to subjects that not only the reason why I brought the guests on the show in the first place, but I am also avoiding any topics that they don't want to discuss. And so I do begin about a week before I record with my guests, a shared Google Doc of talking points that they're able to add and subtract as they see fit. And, that I am honoring anything that they are just really uncomfortable talking about, or just do not mention this, or there are just so many things in this world that can be triggering for so many people that we wouldn't be aware of in certain instances. So some we are and some we aren't. And constantly reminding ourselves that you have no idea what's going on in someone's head, on someone's day, in someone's week, especially during such a trying point in history.
I was really happy that we both aligned on that, like making sure that they're comfortable and we're not exploiting them or in any way or triggering any guest or listener. So I'm so glad because so mental health is all health is so important to me. Just taking care of ourselves and constantly being able to improve and feel better so that we can like live life to our fullest and not have these limitations. I'm not very big on limitations, and I think back to when I was like younger and
Which
my
is
mom was
funny
like,
because you use the word limitations, but like you respect boundaries. And
oh,
so, very, very different.
interesting. Oh, I have to talk to my therapist about that. So I also go to a therapist. I've had like still standing together is about it's kind of evolving. And when it first started, it evolved
How long
from
have you had this group?
so 2019 was when we originally like I started the planning in November 2018, but 2019 was when it really launched. So it stemmed from me hitting a point where I wasn't able to get out of bed again. I was in my lowest point of depression. My anxiety was through the roof. I could barely talk to people. I was isolating. I had panic attack disorder, but I was not, they weren't so much, but everything else was being affected. And I wasn't getting help because of money. And so
Mm.
finally, I was at my worst. I knew better than to not have therapy. I've been going to therapy since I was 24. So, um, you know, I had people who were there for me. I remember my boyfriend came home from work because I was like, I was debilitated. There was no getting me out of bed, and I could I was dizzy. It was an experience, but I had been there before years earlier, and I had promised myself I would do what I needed to do to take care of myself to not get that way, right? So flash forward like 6 months, my sister had put money in my account, my boyfriend came home, my family was like, this is like we need to get you moving again, like we need to get you talking to someone, because I couldn't do it for myself. I talked myself out of it. And so 6 months later, I was in therapy, and I remember hysterical, as I do often, hysterically crying in therapy. And I was just, telling my therapist, like, I can't imagine people who don't know where to turn, because I would turn, if let's say MJ was like the first time we met, I would contact you before I would contact my sister. You know what I mean? Because I was so afraid of burdening my family and like people I knew for a long times at that point. So, and I kind of came with this concept. I was like, I'm not a therapist. I don't want to go back to school for it, but how can I do this to where I can get people connected with who they need to be, and like build them friendships where they know that they can reach out to that person if they're stuck in bed that day, or if they're, any type of difficulty they're going through. So Still Standing Together came about. We hold like support groups, workshops. I'm actually expanding because for Mental Health Awareness Month, I try to pick a new focus. And so since movement is such a big part of my mental health, and movement can be so great for everyone's better health in many ways, but also the mind. So I've always wanted to expand on Still Staying Together. So there's a division starting, which I haven't announced yet. But there's a division starting called Rise. So it's going to have arts and healing. It's going to have ongoing classes as opposed to just the support groups and workshops that I hold like every 6 to 8 weeks. So these ongoing classes will be like movement, fitness, arts and healing. There'll be like natural remedy classes. Like I want ongoing opportunities for people. And I want, there'll still be support groups, and I'm hoping to offer, ways that community can come together. My ultimate goal, I'm going to wrap this up, I promise. My ultimate goal for Still Standing Together, though, is what you mentioned is one is normalizing it, getting people talking so that they don't have to hide, so that they seek help. The other big ultimate goal of Still Standing Together is to eventually get it to where like it's not more affordable, but it's accessible to people, because I don't want to take away from, the therapists and their value, and traditional, non-traditional coaches, spiritual guides, mentors, things like that. But starting programs, I don't know, would I have to go to legislation? I don't know this yet. So like doing things to where mental health checks are like annuals, like you would get to go to a doctor, or every 6 months at a dentist, and it's covered. Yeah. So that's my biggest goal. What I do now though with it is that anything that comes in financially, 10% is always going towards either the Still Standing grant, which is given 1 year to a woman or femme identifying person who has gone through like a crisis. So the first year we gave it to a woman who was hit by a car on her way to work, and she was suffering traumatic experience, brain trauma. And then this year we actually gave it to a woman who is in New York, and she's actually someone I do know, but she had a stroke, unexpected stroke, and so her recovery, she was limited during pandemic. And so with the grant that we were able to give this year, she was actually able to get this really cool like hand motion therapy for at home, because she's in New York. So it was really hard for her to get to therapy, like, all these situations. But now she had no mobility. She was just waiting to get this crazy robot type thing. I forget the name of it now. I apologize, but it is on our site. But she was able to get that, and now she has mobility, on her with her left hand, which she did not have because she was waiting to get this, equipment.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So were your meetups in person that went virtual? And
yeah.
when they went virtual, I know a lot of our other podcast guests have been able to expand their audience with virtual. So do you think you'll continue offering both in person and virtual moving forward?
I will. Yes. So when pandemic hit, I mean, I'm human, and so I kind of backed off a little bit because I felt like we were really all overwhelmed. And so instead of, I took a little break from offering the groups. We had done a few
fill what you can't pour from an empty cup. So
yeah,
you had to make sure
it was empty. It was real empty.
You gotta put your mask on before assisting others. All those
Absolutely.
sayings.
Yes. And so I have now found the way that I feel that the connections can still happen virtually. But I'm in the fall, we're hoping to go back to in person as well. So, but what I did was focus on reaching out directly to our community of people that have, so I really focused on individualism. But yeah, so virtual worked though. And thankfully we were able to, like everyone else, people from other states now were able to join in. And so it opens up a whole new world of like, okay, well, where can this go to make sure that people are supported all over?
One of the things I've loved, I've joined up with a couple different anti-racism workshop groups, and one of the phrases that, instead of saying a safe space, like, because it's a brave space. And I think that also sounds like it resonates for Still Standing Together, because everyone has been through trauma and is trying to like work through it. And so there could be some discomfort, but it's, working through that discomfort in a completely different way, with trying to heal.
Yes, and I love that, a brave space. Like, I love that so much, and that's the goal. I mean, just still standing together actually came from one night when we were watching the show, A Million Little Things, and I couldn't find
Mhm.
a name for couldn't find a name for what I wanted to do that like really had power for me. And they were singing the Elton John "Still Standing" song, and I was like, okay, well here
Oh,
we go.
yeah. Okay.
So yeah, so
All
I mean,
right.
it's just all about how many resources, tools can we provide for people to help prevent them, and help them cope, help them to get through whatever they're going through, and then how many connections and relatable experiences can I also connect people with so that they know that like they're not one by themselves. And I know this comment, but like really we don't want people to know they're alone, because once you're alone, the hardest part I feel is reaching out. And you know so
Well,
how
that's
many
amazing that you've put that together. I love it. So, well, let's switch to some fun
yes.
chatter. You sent me an email about like this long list of venues throughout not just the Philadelphia area, but like the region. And you're like, I just went to all of these this weekend. Have you heard of them? And some of them I was familiar with, some I wasn't. You had a crazy wedding weekend, and I want to hear all about it
Oh my
because the way that those venues listed out made no sense to me. So
Oh my goodness, MJ, and I could not wait to tell you, like, every single event that I was going to, I was like, "I have to tell
I was like,
MJ."
save it for the podcast,
Yeah,
save it for the podcast,
save it
save it
for
for
the
the podcast.
podcast. So I did, I saved it for the podcast. Well, I did write you an email, but, so I had a wedding bonanza. I think which probably you've seen, everybody who planned to get married in 2020, everyone moved their event to May of 2021. So, there was a shower that was in there was I had a bridal shower for a wedding I was in, but the wedding bonanza weekend was wild. So we went to a place called the Cove, which is in New Jersey. Nice little banquet hall, delicious food. So that was the first one. That was the rehearsal dinner. I was in this wedding, so I was at the rehearsal dinner. The next night I had a wedding. So we're at Friday. So it was Thursday. Next night, Friday, I had a wedding. And I was so excited because I'd never been. It was a traditional Jewish wedding, and I'd never been to that. So I was really excited to be a part of that. And then it was also at a Russian restaurant. And so I got to eat such good food, such good food. The food just kept revolving around the table. And what was wild about it, and I don't even know, if my friend's listening, she's gonna laugh, but I don't even know if she knew this was gonna happen. The DJ and the performers there, it was like you were at like an award show, like a concert. There were performers, and I was all up in that because I love performances and dances. And so they had like dancers with feathers, and they were live singers, and lights everywhere. Like it was magical. That was called Golden Gate. So
That's
then
right.
the
And I'm
next,
curious, I,
yeah.
I meant to look up to see if that was the same owners that own Fabrica. So there is a spot that opens up right before the pandemic, that my friend Beth Lawrence was helping to open. And I think you introduced me to Beth Lawrence. Pretty sure you did. It was amazing, when they did like kind of the soft opening, and the performances were absolutely wild. Like it was a whole nother level.
And it's funny, as I performed with some of those friends that perform at Fabrica now, they are incredible. I don't go in the air. I'm afraid to, and they do wild things in the air that like everyone has to go see. So I don't know if that is, but Golden Gate was very, you would not expect it. And it was in Ben Salem. So I was excited to tell you all these different spots because I was in New Jersey on Thursday. I was in Ben Salem on Friday. Saturday, I was back in New Jersey at Clark's, I believe it's called, which was, we were overlooking like a dock with, oh gosh, here's my awful geography. And I don't know if it was a river, lake. I don't know.
Body of
It was
water
a
in New
body of
Jersey.
water. It was very pretty. Again,
Was this another
awesome.
wedding that
This was
Saturday night?
another wedding. This was a wedding I was in all day long. So, and then the next day I had a bridal shower. So Saturday I was in New Jersey. Sunday I was in Glen Mills. at Terrain, which I
Mm-hmm.
had never been, but I know you're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's lovely. And then at night, I came home and ordered a pizza because I was so tired from the weekend.
That is exhausting. That is wow. Was the rehearsal dinner paired with the Friday night wedding or for the Saturday wedding?
It was paired for the Saturday.
Okay, so you had rehearsal dinner Thursday, a completely different wedding Friday, and then were you in the wedding on Friday as well?
No. Well,
Okay.
I felt like it because I threw myself in on stage a couple times.
Love it. That's being the best wedding guest
Yes,
ever.
and then the wedding, I saw 3 different groups of friends in one weekend, but I got everything in from pandemic, not seeing anybody, to being vaxxed and, like, partying with 3 different
And
groups.
how was that for you? Because I actually, I just had a blog post go live today about like how do we do this again? How do we? Okay, we're vaxxed up, stuff's opening up. How do we do this? Because a girlfriend of mine had suggested that as a podcast episode, and I was like, well, I think it probably fit better as a blog because we do recordings so far in advance that, by the time the episode airs, who knows. But, different things have come out of my friends' mouths where, in April when I'm realizing like, okay, we're all going to be vaxxed by mid to late May. I'd love to host like a girls brunch, happy hour, like you name it. And everyone's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I'm super excited." And the one was like, "Can I wear sweatpants and not talk to anyone?" And then, we just did indoor dining for the first time this past Friday, and my friend is fully vaxxed as well is like, "I'm not comfortable with that. Like, I am not ready for that." And so, I think the point that I just tried to hit home was ease into it, do what you're comfortable with, and just respect what other people's wishes are. That, everybody's going to be on different levels of what they want to do, how they want to do it. So, don't question people's comfort levels and just be supportive. And I feel like it's the same thing that we've been saying throughout the entire pandemic of, give yourself that grace and that space
Mhm.
to do what you need to do. And it's just, it's almost like nothing's changed and everything's changed.
Absolutely. So I think that that is such good advice, MG, of like ease into it, because I did. So I should mention 3 weeks before this wedding bonanza weekend, I also had that bridal shower. But then I forgot we also had the bachelorette party at Morgan's Pier. We wanted to be outside. Ended up being that really cold weekend in May,
Hmm.
where like we had blankets on us, but they were so accommodating. It was very nice. That I eased into it. So like I was like, okay, I'm going to see what I feel like going into this small bridal shower situation. Now and then from there I grew more comfortable. Now I'm a hugger, so I did back off of like I made sure for myself and also for other people, like I didn't jump in for the hug, which I normally
That's
would.
the same advice I gave. I was like,
Is it okay?
because I'm a huge hugger too. And some people, even pre pandemic, were not comfortable hugging. And so I've been making sure that when I'm seeing someone for the first time, that it's like, are you comfortable if I hug you? Like, I'm very excited to see you. So, um, and then when they see me hugging other people, when they go for the hug, like it makes it that so you don't have to ask because they've seen you hugging, so
Yeah.
you're comfortable. And then it's a
It's
chain
making
reaction
everyone
of hugs.
It is a chain reaction of hugs, and it's making everyone so much more aware of people's boundaries, which is so great that you said that. So, yeah, so I love that. It's a chain reaction of hugs. That's what
I
we
feel
do
like
need.
Daniel, I swear, like we have been just so in sync um about so many different things, and it has been just such a pleasure working with you because I we both have our own ideas and our own experiences, and where you've got your skill set, I've got my skill set, and there's a lot of overlap, but there's um things that we're still able to do on our own. And I have really enjoyed this idea exchange and kind of creating this together with you because you know i I love a lot of your ideas, and some of them it's like, okay, I'm glad that you said that let's not do this, or let's tweak this, and here's why. That it's been great working with someone on a project that we're both essentially benefiting from. And so this podcast has been our little baby,
Yeah.
and this
Yes.
co-parenting and raising it.
We did a very
um
great job co-parenting, and I thank you for that. I have to thank you too, MG, because you've been so open. And but one of the biggest things, which I hope I've told you enough, is like, this has to be it from your voice. Like, it has to reflect you. And so I love, I almost feel like a little mama bird watching you. Like, oh my God, she's got it all. She knows, like, oh yes, she's on point.
She's just flying
Yes,
away.
she's flying away. So I thank you for that. But like, you've just been awesome to work with in terms of being open and being like, understanding where I'm coming from with things, and then being able to tweak it and be like, all right, so this is how, I would say this is how, where I want to come with it. And like, that's amazing, because anything I do with anyone else, I always want it to be a reflection of them.
And so let's talk about season 2. You know, things are opening up. We're getting vaxxed, but I still love the idea of the concept of beyond the venue, because a venue is just a building. Obviously it's so much more than that, but I think we'll just kind of keep diving into talking to different personalities throughout hospitality, entertainment, events, etc., because we're seeing a massive shift, specifically in the hospitality world, where I've talked to so many people who are just done with restaurant life and bar life. And Kylie's episode from last week of, it's, you look around, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're stuck in a bar, and you're just done. At what point do you just say, like, this is not the life I want for myself anymore? And so I think on top of that, with the concept of raising the minimum wage and healthcare for front of house and back of house, and an increase in prices to make sure that restaurants are taking care of their staff. They're just a lot of points that were brought up, even from episode 1, a lot of the things that Brandon talked about, in industry shifts. And I really do think that there's going to be some sort of reckoning that's going to continue to snowball throughout the summer. And I will say I am really relieved that a lot of bars and restaurants were able to get some sort of money to help, like, keep them afloat. And the percentage of places that closed was very small compared to what we initially thought was going to happen. And I know July and August are typically like very, very slow times in the Philadelphia hospitality industry, because everyone goes down the shore. So, and I have a feeling that the New Jersey shore is going to explode this weekend, because I believe that Jersey's mandates are lifted as of Friday. So I am not leaving Philadelphia. I'll still be here over Memorial Day weekend. But I'm just very curious to see what happens. So I still think there are just countless things to discuss and learn, and perspectives to understand. And what are some of your thoughts that you have about season 2? And I
Yes.
definitely want to have Hillary Ray on the show, because when I reached out to her about season 1, she's like, I am so, like, when she said, I'm currently working on season 3 of my own podcast, that would have meant nothing to me a couple months ago. I'm like, oh, how hard could that be? And I was like, oh girl, you take all the time that you need. It is so much work. It's worth it, but it is a lot of work.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, right? Yeah. So for season 2, so I loved season 1. For season 2, I want you to just definitely keep on being at like the forefront of like talking to people who are living through all of this, and sticking with like the concepts you had through the first season. I would love for some guests to return and hear what's going on now with all of these changes. yeah, I'm interested to see, because I'm not in that world, that I'm interested to see like how it's progressed and how we can keep helping. That was one of the biggest things I loved of the direction with each episode, is like, how can we continue to help and buy local, and like name and mention all these different places to go and support, and here's how they're doing it now. And you can get I love that a few people had said, like even you said, like you can go get a drink, take out a drink or a cocktail, So just still continuing to show how we can show that support, and like pointing out different areas in Philly. And I think I might stay in Philly this weekend. I'm like on the fence. I don't like to go anywhere on a holiday.
I don't
But
like traffic.
yeah,
I can't be bothered. I
well, and
just,
all the people still, like I'm still, so after that wedding bonanza, I promised myself, because my parents are a bit older, and I did promise myself I would, take it a little down, like low key for a little bit. So, but yeah, and then there's the traffic. Who's got time for that?
well, so the last question I'll ask you today, your favorite venue. I've asked all of my guests, and they have had such a range of answers, and I still can't get over. I think my favorite. I love all of the responses, but the Kamara's response and her talking about Atlantic City, and you could only see it on the YouTube recording, but the shade that Tom is throwing her on his face, and just it was such this moment of hilarity. I loved it way too much. So, and I know you're like, I'm gonna turn the table on you, and I'm gonna
I
ask you what your favorite venues are. And I I think about this every episode of like, if someone were to ask me, what would I say? And so I think it kind of depends on what the occasion is. So, one of my favorite music venues in the city is Union Transfer. It blows my mind. So, when I was a freshman sophomore at Drexel, I had friends that worked there at when it was a spaghetti warehouse, and so they may or may not have served us underage at the bar. It's obviously long closed now.
yeah.
But so we spent, a couple nights at the spag, I believe as they called it. And so every time I go back there, it just blows my mind of how they transformed this space into just this kick-ass music venue of, having the ability to move the stage forward and backward to allow for more or less capacity. So that's one venue that I'm super pumped to get back into and start seeing shows. I think we've already bought tickets for a show either in November, I think. Who knows?
That's cool.
So excited about that. And I just I'm excited to go back to bars. I think, the Fountain Porter and Druid's Keep and Doobies and all these other bars that we just love the owners, love the bartenders, love being there, that it's been so infuriating, and with good reason. I get why, rules are in place and restrictions, but it's been so hard to try and get together with friends in terms of the weather dictating your social life and needing to be outside and not having the ability, like even if you were going to an outdoor space, that you couldn't just stand and mix and mingle, that you were forced to be seated. And so I'm glad that come June 11th, like all that's going away, and you're able to at least kind of gather instead of being segmented out into different tables, or just altogether not going because, like, okay, there's 15 of us that want to get together, like what are we doing? So I'm just like looking forward to going to a bar, even if it means I'm standing behind it.
Yes, yeah, that's what, and it's still a little, we were outside when we did go to Morgan's Pier, but it's still a bit different. Doesn't feel like back to normal just quite yet,
Right.
but my geez, all these things are coming to me. So I will tell you, I love your responses, and I agree. I like can't wait to. I mean, I've been loving breweries recently, and I just like we've been going to Broken Goblet, and it's funny because you and I are on the same boat. I don't drink beer. because of our like intolerances. But I'll get their cider things. So
Well,
but
the nice thing too about the Pennsylvania breweries, a lot of them do serve. They're legally allowed to sell Pennsylvania wine and spirits. And so that's kind of typically been my go-to move. Like one of the closest microbreweries to us is Second District. And so they'll usually do like a red and a white and or just get a stateside vodka and soda or something that simple. So
okay, see, I never knew that. I always wondered how they were able to do that. So I have an oldie for you as my menu, and I have like just a few that I love. So I don't know if it's still around, but I remember going when I was 21, and it was called Marrakesh, and it was Moroccan.
oh yeah.
Is it
I'm pretty
still
sure that's
around?
where we did my girlfriend's bachelorette party in 2009 or 10,
To
and we
say,
had a blast. It was one of those like only $40 per person, and it was food,
yes,
wine,
and you sat on
wine,
the
wine, wine,
floor, and you
dancing.
like dancing. Yes, so I love that, and I mean, yeah, that makes sense with the year. So, but then and then real quick, because I know we probably have to wrap it up. I love my Northern Liberties places still. Like Dos Segundos and Cafe La Mode is my favorite like brunch spot. So I miss going to like the little in Front Street Cafe, which we're gonna go do next week. So I
Yay!
miss going to all those
Yeah, I
fun.
used to live behind Silk City and across the street from the Ruba Club. So that
Yeah.
was when you go to the Ruba Club, you're in trouble the next day. That somebody get me the water and the Gatorade. It's
Yep, yep. I lived around the corner from the fire, but
okay.
I've never been
Yeah.
to the fire though.
Yeah, I went to several shows there back in like that '07, '08, '09 era.
hmm That's what my
So
boyfriend loved this. But I lived around, and one night I should have just walked in, but I didn't want to go by myself. So yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
it sure does. I mean it's always hard to pick your favorite. So okay, so Danielle, please let us know where you would like our listeners to follow you.
Okay, so you can follow me at Daniela Does What on Instagram, Facebook, and Still Standing Together at Still Standing Together, and then byVesta Agency is at byVesta Agency. Um, all self-explanatory. My website, danielagaldi.com, has them all. And connect with me anytime. And also, I'm going to, make sure you follow Beyond the Venue, which I know you're going to talk about anyway, but follow that one first and then follow me.
And you can and you'll always see Daniela's Instagram handles pop up on Beyond the Venue podcast Instagram because she's always liking and supporting the same way she does MG the venue specialist. So this has just been wonderful, and I'm really glad that we got to wrap up season one by having this conversation today. And I am never had gotten the backstory of Still Standing, and so thank you for your vulnerability, and just willingness to keep sharing not only with our listeners but with the world, and keep being you and keep doing it. So listeners, thank you so much. This is, the end of season one. We are, we are going to be speaking about what season two is going to look like. So make sure you follow Beyond the Venue podcast on Instagram for all the updates of when we'll be coming out with season two. But make sure you check out all previous 11 episodes on all of your favorite podcast streaming platforms. Enjoy the rest of your day.